My father declared to our entire extended family that I was the greatest disappointment of his life during what should have been a celebration of my brother's law school graduation. 3 years later, when my wealth manager called him about transferring my 9-figure technology fund into a family foundation, his crystal tumbler of 30-year scotch crashed to the Italian marble floor he'd once refused to help me finance. The estate he thought defined his legacy now belongs to me, along with half the companies his investment firm had desperately tried to acquire over the years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The day my father publicly disowned me happened during what should have been a joyous family gathering. It was my younger brother Nathan's graduation party, Stanford Law School with highest honors, following precisely in our father's footsteps, continuing the Walsh family's 3-generation legal dynasty. Our family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, sprawled across 12 meticulously landscaped acres where old money whispered through century-old oak trees and staffed discreetly outnumbered family members. The afternoon garden reception overflowed with federal judges, law firm partners, and the kind of East Coast aristocracy whose approval my father, Jonathan Walsh Sr., had cultivated for decades alongside his reputation as one of the nation's most formidable corporate attorneys. I was arranging congratulatory cards near a photo display of Nathan's academic achievements when I felt my father's presence behind me. Jonathan Walsh Sr. had always possessed that quality, the ability to change the atmosphere of any room simply by entering it. At 62, he remained an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired with piercing gray eyes that could dismantle a witness on the stand, or, as I had experienced countless times, a daughter who had chosen a different path. "Olivia," he said, his voice carrying just far enough to reach me alone. "My office. Now." Not a request, never a request from Jonathan Walsh Sr., whose arguments had swayed the Supreme Court on 4 separate occasions. I followed him through the house, past oil paintings of Walsh patriarchs and display cases holding legal awards spanning decades. The walnut-paneled study had been my grandfather's before him, a sanctuary of legal scholarship where family history and professional legacy blended into a singular identity that had always excluded me. My father closed the heavy doors behind us, moving to stand by the fireplace where 3 generations of Walsh family portraits hung in perfect symmetry. I noticed, as I always did, the conspicuous absence of any recognition of my achievements among them. "The Harringtons are here," he said without preamble. "Elizabeth's daughter Claire just made partner at Sullivan and Cromwell, youngest in the firm's history." He straightened a frame containing Nathan's law school acceptance letter, his expression revealing nothing while conveying everything. "She asked about you, of course. Everyone has. Wondering what you're doing with yourself now that it's been, 2 years since that internet scheme of yours collapsed?" 3 years. I corrected quietly. And Horizon wasn't a scheme. I sold it. He dismissed this detail with a wave of his hand. "For pennies, Olivia. After wasting your Yale education on a ridiculous little app instead of accepting the clerkship Justice Brennan offered as a personal favor to me." My father turned to face me fully, his expression a master class in controlled disappointment. "The Walshes have shaped corporate law for 3 generations. Your grandfather advised presidential cabinets. I've argued successfully before the highest court in the land multiple times. Your brother at 26 is already being courted by firms that wouldn't look twice at most people with twice his experience." I remained silent, having learned long ago that interrupting my father's precisely constructed arguments only extended them and intensified his displeasure. "And then there's you," he continued, each word measured for maximum impact. 29 years old, living in that absurd industrial space in Brooklyn, doing what exactly? Strategic consulting, you say? For whom, Olivia? What respected institution or individual of consequence would seek counsel from someone whose only business accomplishment ended in a fire sale? I met his gaze directly, our shared Walsh gray eyes connecting across a divide far greater than the physical space between us. "I'm doing well, Father. My clients—" "Spare me," he interrupted, glancing at his watch. "The point is, I've had enough of making excuses for you when people ask. And they do ask, Olivia, with that particular blend of curiosity and pity that is absolutely unbearable for a man in my position." He adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, a gesture I recognized as preparation for delivering a verdict. "I've decided I will simply tell them the truth, which is that you are our family's disappointment, that despite every advantage, every opportunity, every door opened for you, you have chosen mediocrity. That the Walsh intellect and ambition apparently skipped a generation with you." He smoothed an invisible wrinkle from his immaculate suit jacket. "I'm through pretending otherwise." The Tao words should have cut deeper. Perhaps they would have years earlier. Instead, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if his finally articulating what he'd communicated in countless subtle ways since my childhood had somehow released me from its power. "I understand," I said simply. He tilted his head slightly, perhaps surprised by my lack of protest. "Do you? I wonder. Your mother insists I'm too hard on you, that you're finding your way. But I see the truth, Olivia. You lack what it takes to be a true Walsh, the discipline, the focus, the excellence." "Is that all?" I asked, my voice steady. "One more thing," he said, regaining his footing. "Richard Harrington's son James is here. Recently divorced, extremely eligible, managing his family's foundation. Your mother and I think it would be appropriate for you to show particular interest." I smiled slightly. "Because a strategic marriage might compensate for my professional shortcomings?" "Don't be crude, Olivia," he replied sharply. "Because it's time you contributed something of value to this family." As we exited the study, my father's hand briefly gripped my arm just above the elbow. "I expect you to be charming, engaging, and to keep your alternative viewpoints to yourself. The Walshes have a reputation to maintain, even if you seem determined to undermine it." The garden reception continued in full swing as we rejoined it separately. My father immediately swept into a circle of federal judges and law firm partners, while I found a quiet moment by the champagne fountain. From this vantage point, I could observe the carefully choreographed dance of influence and connection that had been the backdrop of my entire childhood. Nathan caught my eye from across the manicured lawn and excused himself from a group of admiring professors to join me. "Dad? Summit?" he asked quietly, handing me a fresh glass of champagne. "The usual," I replied. "Family disappointment, wasted potential. Why can't you be more like Nathan?" He winced. I wish he wouldn't do that. "Don't," I said genuinely. "You've earned every accolade. I'm proud of you." My brother studied me carefully. At 3 years, my junior, he had somehow always seemed the older sibling, more strategic, more measured, more Walsh. "You know what's insane?" he said finally. "He has absolutely no idea what you're actually doing, does he?" I smiled and took a sip of champagne. "Not a clue. Are you ever going to tell them?" I watched as my father laughed at something. James Harrington said, his eyes already calculating potential merger possibilities between our families. "What would be the point?" I asked. "Father made up his mind about me long before I sold Horizon. Nothing I do will ever fit his definition of success because he never approved of the path." "But if he knew about—" "He doesn't need to know," I interrupted gently. "And neither does anyone else here." Nathan shook his head. "You're the strangest person, Liv. Anyone else would be shouting their accomplishments from the rooftops, especially to silence critics like Dad." I shrugged. Perhaps I don't recognize his right to judge the value of my life. My brother's expression shifted to something like admiration mixed with confusion. How did two people raised in the same house turn out so differently? Nature versus nurture, The eternal mystery, I replied lightly. Now go circulate before father sends a search party. I believe you're needed for photographs with the Harrington's daughter, potential matrimonial merger target. As Nathan reluctantly rejoined the strategic socializing, I observed my father holding court among his peers. Jonathan Walsh Sr., the flawless legal patriarch whose entire identity was constructed around family legacy, professional achievement, and maintaining appearances. The man who had just formally declared me a disappointment to the Walsh name. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while they'd been measuring my worth against their narrowly defined metrics of success, I had been building something entirely different, something that would have shattered their understanding of achievement, of influence, of power. But that revelation would come later, and when it did, it wouldn't arrive as a desperate plea for validation or recognition. When the truth, finally, emerged about exactly who Olivia Walsh had become, it would arrive precisely when I chose, not because I needed their approval, but because they would need mine. I took another sip of champagne and allowed myself a small, private smile. Let my father tell everyone I was the family disappointment. The opinion of people who had never truly seen me had long ago ceased to determine my worth. 3 days after my father's declaration, I sat in my absurd industrial space in Brooklyn, as he called it, a converted warehouse loft in Dumbo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The space was minimalist by design rather than necessity, its carefully selected furnishings each carrying significance beyond aesthetic value. A far cry from the cluttered opulence of the Walsh estate where family crests and legal tomes competed for space with crystal decanters and hunting trophies. My phone rang with an incoming call from Meera Kapoor, my chief investment strategist, and one of the few people who knew the full scope of what I'd built since walking away from the legal career my father had prescribed. The Singapore acquisition cleared final regulatory approval, she said without preamble when I answered. We can announce next week. Valuation exceeded projections by 18%. They're desperate to integrate our platform before competitors realize what we've developed. Our controlling interest increases to 64% of total holdings. I made a note in the leather journal I still maintain despite gentle teasing from my tech-forward team. Some habits from my Walsh upbringing had proven useful, even as I'd discarded others. And Walsh & Partners still has no idea they're about to lose exclusive access to the Asian markets they've been cultivating for the past decade? I asked, already knowing the answer. Your father's firm has built their entire emerging market strategy on legal frameworks that will be obsolete within 90 days, Meera confirmed, the smile evident in her voice. Their newest client, Takashi Enterprises, has already signed preliminary agreements to transition to our platform once we go public. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I felt a curious blend of professional satisfaction and personal conflict. Walsh & Partners had been my father's life's work, the legal empire he had built from a respectable but modest family practice into an international corporate law powerhouse. I hadn't designed Nexus Legal AI to specifically undermine his firm, but disruption of established legal service providers had been inevitable. They'll adapt, I said, more to myself than to Meera. Walsh & Partners has survived regulatory shifts before. Not like this, Meera countered. Olivia, when are you going to tell them? This acquisition puts your net worth above the combined partners' equity of Walsh & Partners. You're about to control legal technology that will fundamentally alter how global commerce functions. Your father's world is built on systems you're rendering obsolete. I moved to the window, watching the Brooklyn Bridge span the divide between my world and the Manhattan skyline where my family's legacy was headquartered. They wouldn't understand what I've built, Meera, I replied after a moment. To them, success only has meaning within established frameworks, courtrooms, law journals, billable hours, traditional power structures. So you're just going to let them continue believing you're some small-time consultant living paycheck to paycheck in Brooklyn while you're actually building technology that matters? She challenged. Technology that will democratize legal access for millions of people traditional firms have excluded? Yes, I finished quietly. At least for now. Mira sighed. You're the strangest billionaire I've ever worked for, Olivia. Walsh. Technically not a billionaire yet, I corrected. Not until the Singapore deal closes. Semantics, she dismissed. The point is, most people who've achieved what you have would be shoving it in the faces of anyone who ever doubted them, especially a father who literally called them a disappointment 3 days ago. I smiled despite myself. I don't need my father's validation, Mira. I outgrew that particular hunger years ago. Fine, she conceded. But can I at least convince you to upgrade your security? The moment this acquisition hits the financial press, your profile changes dramatically. You won't be able to maintain the anonymity you've cultivated. She was right, of course. For 3 years, I'd operated in the background, building Nexus Legal AI through a complex structure of holding companies and investment vehicles that deliberately obscured my position as founder and majority shareholder. Only a handful of people knew that the revolutionary legal technology platform poised to disrupt global corporate law had been created by the disappointment of the Walsh family. I'll consider additional security after the announcement, I agreed. And after the Walsh estate dinner this weekend. You're still attending your father's birthday celebration? Mira asked, disbelief evident in her voice. I had almost forgotten Jonathan Walsh Sr.'s 70th birthday dinner, an event that would gather the most influential figures in corporate law under the crystal chandeliers of my childhood home. An occasion my mother had been planning for months, where my brother's achievements would be spotlighted and my perceived failures carefully minimized. Yes, I said after a moment. I'll be there. Wearing what? Mira pressed. Please tell me not another one of those intentionally unimpressive outfits you wear to family functions. I laughed. What's wrong with my family function attire? Olivia, you own significant stakes in 3 fashion houses. You have designers who would kill to dress you exclusively. Yet every time you see your family, you deliberately choose clothes that scream struggling millennial. I prefer understated professional, I corrected. You wore a department store blazer to Thanksgiving, she countered. It was a perfectly nice blazer. Mira's exasperation was palpable even through the phone. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You've created this elaborate performance of mediocrity for your family while building an empire they can't even imagine. At some point, this stops being strategic and starts becoming. What? I prompted when she hesitated. I don't know. Psychological? She suggested carefully. Her words hit closer to truth than I wanted to admit. What had begun as a desire for independence, to prove I could succeed without the Walsh name opening doors, had evolved into something more complex. I had discovered a certain freedom in being underestimated, in operating without the weight of familial expectations. Perhaps I had become too comfortable in that shadow existence. The Singapore acquisition changes things, I acknowledged. I won't be able to maintain the same level of anonymity once the deal is public. So, what's the plan for the Walsh estate dinner this weekend? Mira asked. One last performance as the family disappointment before your face is on the cover of every legal and business publication next week? I considered the question seriously. I'm not going to orchestrate some dramatic reveal, if that's what you're suggesting. That would be about proving something to them, and this was never about that. Then what was it about, Olivia? The question hung between us, weighted with implications I'd avoided examining too closely. Why had I kept my success so carefully hidden from the family that had dismissed my potential? Was it really just about building something on my own terms? Or was there something deeper? some need to definitively separate my identity from the Walsh legacy before revealing I had exceeded it. It was about freedom, I said finally. The freedom to define success on my own terms, to build something with meaning beyond billable hours and corporate acquisitions, the freedom to fail without an audience, to experiment without judgment, to succeed without having that success immediately absorbed into the Walsh narrative. Mira was quiet for a moment. And now? When your success becomes impossible to hide? I turned from the window, surveying the space that had witnessed the creation of what would soon become one of the most valuable legal technology companies in the world. The whiteboard walls still bearing the original algorithms that had evolved into Nexus Legal AI's revolutionary platform, the worn leather sofa where my founding team had crashed during those early coding marathons, the kitchen table where we'd signed our first major contract, too broke to afford proper office space. Now I protect what we've built, I said with newfound clarity. I don't need a dramatic reveal or vindication. When the acquisition is announced, my role will become public knowledge through normal channels. If my family notices, they notice. If not, their perception doesn't change the reality of what we've accomplished. You really don't care if they know, do you? Mira sounded genuinely puzzled. Even after what your father said? I care about the work, I replied simply. About the millions of people who will gain legal access through our platform? About the team that sacrificed to bring this vision to life? Those things matter. My father's opinion doesn't. After ending the call, I opened my laptop to review the final acquisition documents. The numbers were staggering even to me, 9 figures becoming 10 with a single transaction. Market projections that would make traditional law firm partners lose sleep. A technology platform poised to render obsolete the very systems through which families like mine had concentrated legal power for generations. My phone chimed with a text from my brother. Dad asking if you need car service for Saturday dinner. Told him you'd arrange your own. Don't forget 7 p.m. sharp formal attire. Speech prep for Dad underway. You've been allocated 90 seconds in program. Sorry. I smiled at Nathan's apologetic tone. Even as the golden child, he recognized the inequity in our treatment. 90 seconds. To acknowledge a lifetime of our father's influence, while Nathan would undoubtedly deliver the evening's keynote tribute. I texted back, all set with transportation. Will arrive 6:45 to help with anything needed. Tell Father not to worry about my remarks. I'll keep them appropriately brief. Setting down the phone, I returned to the acquisition documents with renewed focus. In less than a week, the legal world would be introduced to Olivia Walsh not as the disappointment of a dynasty, but as the architect of its future. Not through dramatic confrontation or petty vindication, but through the undeniable evidence of what I had built while they were busy measuring my worth by outdated standards. The Walsh name had opened doors for generations through the legal systems of the past. But the future belonged to those who could create new systems, and I had spent 3 years building the skeleton key to legal access that would transform how justice was served and who could afford to seek it. The headquarters of Nexus Legal. AI occupied the top 2 floors of a renovated industrial building in Williamsburg, deliberately located far from Manhattan's corporate law district, where Walsh and Partners maintained their gleaming offices in a legacy skyscraper that had housed the firm for 4 decades. I had chosen this location purposefully when we outgrew the Brooklyn loft, wanting a space that represented our ethos. Innovation built on solid foundations, transparency married with security, traditional strength reimagined for a new era. The ZIF. Morning before my father's birthday celebration, I arrived early for the final pre-announcement briefing with our executive team. The security guard at the desk greeted me with a simple nod. No special treatment, no recognition that the unassuming woman in jeans and a blazer owned the building and everything in it. I had established this culture intentionally, creating an environment where ideas outranked titles and impact mattered more than status. In the main conference room, 8 people awaited me. My core team of brilliant minds I had carefully recruited not from prestigious law firms, but from unexpected corners of innovation. Meera Kapoor, my chief strategist, had been a quantitative analyst at a boutique investment firm before developing an algorithm that caught my attention. Alejandro Moreno, our chief technology officer, had dropped out of MIT to build legal access tools for immigrant communities. Dr. Layla Washington, our head of global markets, had left a promising career at the Justice Department to help shape a system she believed could create more equitable access to legal resources. These were the people who had believed in my vision when it existed only as mathematical models and ambitious frameworks, who had worked beside me through 3 pivots and countless setbacks, who had never once questioned my leadership despite my deliberate separation from the Walsh name and the doors it could have opened. Singapore regulators signed off at 3 a.m. our time, Layla announced as I took my seat at the table. All clearances are complete. We can formally announce Monday as planned. The legal press has been receiving mysterious tips about a major, disruption in corporate law infrastructure, Alejandro added with a slight smile. The American lawyer has 3 reporters dedicated to uncovering who's behind it. And what have they found? I asked, accepting the coffee Meera slid across the table. Nothing concrete, she replied. They know Nexus is the company behind the technology platform. They know we've been acquiring strategic infrastructure under various holding companies. But the ownership structure has held. They haven't connected the dots to you yet. That changes Monday, Layla reminded us. The SEC filings will make your controlling interest public. By Monday afternoon, everyone will know that Olivia Walsh, the overlooked daughter of Jonathan Walsh Sr., has built the platform that's about to make much of her father's business model obsolete. I nodded, accepting this reality we had prepared for over years of careful development. Our messaging remains focused on the technology and its implications for legal access. My background is relevant only insofar as it informed the vision for democratizing these systems. Alejandro leaned forward, his expression unusually serious. Olivia, with respect, the Walsh angle is a major hook for the press. Your family's reputation was built on exactly the legal gatekeeping our platform eliminates. That contrast is compelling, especially given your father's position as the face of old guard corporate law. I understand the narrative appeal, I acknowledged, but Nexus didn't succeed because of or in spite of my family name. It succeeded because we built better technology with a more inclusive vision. That's the story that matters. My team exchanged glances, a familiar moment when they collectively wondered why I remained so determined to separate my achievement from the family that had dismissed it. They respected my position, but didn't fully understand it. Meera broke the momentary silence. The announcement has been scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday. The major legal and financial networks will carry it live. We've arranged for you to ring the opening bell at the exchange afterward. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. My father had rung that same bell twice throughout his career, each occasion marking another expansion of Walsh & Partners' influence. Now his supposedly underachieving daughter would stand in that same spot, heralding a technology that would fundamentally transform the systems he had mastered. Walsh & Partners will be notified along with other major law firms at 8 a.m. Monday, Layla continued. Standard procedure, giving them an hour to process the announcement before markets open. Your father will receive the same briefing document as his competitors, Alejandro suggested carefully. Unless you want to call him before, give him some advanced warning about what's coming. I considered this option briefly before shaking my head. No. Walsh & Partners receives the same information as everyone else. No special treatment, no early access. That's been our policy from the beginning. And the dinner tomorrow night? Meera asked, her tone deliberately casual. The timing is interesting. You'll be celebrating your father's legacy approximately 36 hours before announcing the platform that will transform it. The room grew quiet. My team understood the personal complexity underlying our professional achievement. They had witnessed my careful separation from the Walsh name, my deliberate, choice to succeed on terms my family would never have approved. They recognized tomorrow night's event for what it was, perhaps the final moment when the old narrative about Olivia Walsh, family disappointment, would remain unchallenged. Tomorrow night is about my father, I said firmly. Not about Nexus, not about the announcement, and certainly not about using either as some form of vindication. Layla studied me with the frank assessment that made her such a valuable executive. You've spent 3 years building something revolutionary while your family believed you were floundering. You've created more wealth and influence than the Yi. Combined Walsh legacy while being treated as its greatest disappointment. And you're telling us that when you sit at that dinner tomorrow night, knowing what Monday will bring, you won't feel any satisfaction in their impending realization that they completely misjudged you. I met her gaze steadily. Their misjudgment was never the motivation, Layla. It was merely the freedom being underestimated gave me. Room to work without the weight of the Walsh expectations. For that, I'm actually grateful. That's remarkably zen, Alejandro observed with raised eyebrows. I smiled. Not zen, strategic. The energy most people waste seeking validation or nursing resentment, we channeled into building something transformative. That's why we're here announcing this platform while firms with far more resources are scrambling to catch up. The meeting continued with operational details for the announcement, additional security protocols, media response strategies, market reaction contingencies. My team was exceptionally prepared, having anticipated this moment through years of careful development. When we adjourned, Mira remained behind as the others filed out. You didn't answer Layla's question, she noted once we were alone. Not really. About whether I'll feel satisfaction? She nodded. I considered the question more deeply. What I feel about Monday isn't about vindication. It's about confirmation. Of a principle I've staked my work on, that new systems will inevitably replace old ones when they create more value for more people. That inclusivity generates more robust markets than exclusivity. That the future belongs to those who design it rather than those who defend the past. And the fact that your family represents those defending the past is incidental? Mira asked, her tone making clear she didn't believe this. Meaningful to me personally, perhaps, I replied, but irrelevant to what we've built. Mira studied me with the perceptiveness that had made her my most trusted advisor. You know what I think? I think your greatest achievement isn't Nexus. It's your liberation from needing your family's approval. That's what made everything else possible. Her observation struck closer to truth than I had allowed myself to acknowledge. As I stepped from the car, I noticed Nathan waiting on the front steps, an unexpected gesture that spoke to my brother's increasing efforts to bridge the gap our father seemed determined to widen. You're early, he said, greeting me with a genuine hug and then stepping back to study my appearance. And you look different. Different how? I asked, curious about his perception. He studied me thoughtfully. More present somehow, less like you're trying to disappear. He offered his arm as we climbed the limestone steps. Fair warning, Dad has seated you between James Harrington and Judge Cartwright's son. The matchmaking has reached strategic new heights. I laughed. Still determined to secure the Walsh legacy through advantageous marriage? More than ever, Nathan confirmed, lowering his voice as we entered the grand foyer. Though I'm not sure why he's so fixated on it for you when I'm the one whose continued bachelorhood actively distresses him. Because you're fulfilling the Walsh legacy professionally, I explained lightly. I'm the one who needs matrimonial redemption. Nathan's expression grew serious as we paused in the marble entryway, the sounds of arriving guests and clinking crystal filtering through from the main salon. You know I don't see you that way, right? The family disappointment or whatever ridiculous label Dad has assigned. His sincerity touched me. I know, Nathan, and I appreciate that more than you realize. I just wish you'd let them see what you're actually doing. I mean, I only know fragments, but even those are impressive. This consulting work of yours. Tonight is about father, I interrupted gently. Not about me correcting any misperceptions. He looked like he wanted to argue further but was interrupted by our mother's approach. Resplendent in midnight blue Valentino and family diamonds that marked significant Walsh milestones. Her expression upon seeing me contained the familiar, rapid calculation, assessment of my appearance, determination of whether it met standards, quick recalibration of what she would say to explain my presence to her carefully curated guest list. "Olivia, you're early," she observed with faint surprise. Someone who had consistently scheduled me to arrive after most guests were already present to minimize opportunities for me to make unfavorable impressions. Her gaze traveled efficiently over my attire, finding it unexpectedly acceptable. "That's a lovely dress. New?" "Relatively," I replied, accepting her air kiss without elaboration. "Well, it's appropriate," she conceded, the closest approximation to a compliment her disappointing daughter could expect. "The Harringtons arrived 10 minutes ago. James has already asked after you twice." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes, maintaining the pleasant neutrality that had become my standard operating procedure for family functions. "I'll be sure to thank him for his interest." "More than interest, Olivia," my mother corrected, lowering her voice though no one was within earshot. "The Harringtons are considering a significant restructuring of their legal affairs. Your father thinks James is seeking greater control of their litigation strategy." The implication was clear. This potential match carried business advantages, beyond the usual social alignments she pursued. "How convenient," I remarked mildly. Something in my tone caught her attention, drawing a more focused assessment than her usual dismissive glance. "You seem different tonight." "Like brother, like mother," I observed, though her observation carried suspicion rather than Nathan's affection. "Do I?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "More." She searched for the right word, her social precision, demanding accuracy, composed. Before I could respond, my father appeared, distinguished in his tuxedo with the subtle confidence of a man who had spent decades in courtrooms where his opinion shaped legal precedent and influenced corporate governance. Jonathan Walsh Sr. at 70 remained an imposing figure. Tall, silver-haired, with the characteristic Walsh gray eyes that had passed to both his children. Eyes that lit with genuine surprise upon seeing me. "Olivia," he said, his brief embrace, warmer than my mother's air kiss but still containing the restraint that characterized all Walsh displays of affection. "You're punctual, for once." The minor fiction that I was characteristically late rather than chronically disappointing was one of his small hypocrisies, his subtle attempt to present me more favorably in family mythology. "Happy birthday, Father," I said, returning his embrace with genuine warmth. Despite our professional divergence, the personal connection had remained largely intact, less weighted with expectation than my relationship with my mother, more accepting of my different path even if he didn't fully understand it. "You look lovely," he said, holding me at arm's length for inspection. "There's something different about you tonight, more confident." I smiled at this third variation on the same observation. Maybe I'm just happy to celebrate with you. Or perhaps she's finally recognizing the opportunity the Harrington connection represents, my mother suggested, unable to resist redirecting the conversation to her strategic objectives. My father's slight eye roll was nearly imperceptible, a private communication between us acknowledging but not directly challenging my mother's matchmaking agenda. "Whatever the reason, I'm glad to have both my children here," he offered, extending an arm to each of us. "Shall we join our guests? I believe your mother has scheduled my entrance for precisely this moment." As we moved toward the grand salon, where nearly 150 of the legal elite had gathered to celebrate my father's legacy, I felt a strange confluence of worlds, the Walsh universe, I had strategically distanced myself from colliding with the reality of what awaited on Monday morning. For perhaps the last time, I would navigate this environment as Olivia Walsh, family disappointment and professional underachiever, rather than as the architect of legal disruption poised to transform her father's industry. The evening proceeded, with the precisely choreographed elegance that characterized all Walsh functions, cocktails flowing seamlessly into dinner, conversations strategically facilitated to strengthen key alliances, every element from floral arrangements to musical, selections carefully curated to reinforce the family's impeccable taste and influence. I was indeed seated between James Harrington and Marshall Cartwright, eligible bachelors from families whose connections would benefit the Walsh portfolio in specific ways my mother had undoubtedly mapped out in detail. I engaged with them pleasantly, neither encouraging nor discouraging their obvious interest, maintaining the careful balance I had perfected at countless similar events. "Your mother mentioned you're doing some sort of consulting work," James said as the first course was served, his tone suggesting both curiosity and slight condescension. "Something in the tech sector?" "Legal technology, yes," I confirmed simply. "Fascinating field," he remarked with the confidence of someone who had read a few headlines but maintained a safe distance from actual innovation. "The Harrington Foundation has been considering some strategic investments in that area. Perhaps you could share your insights sometime. Nothing too technical, of course. Just the general trends." I smiled, knowing that by Monday afternoon, the Harrington Foundation would be frantically convening emergency meetings about the very technology I had developed. I'd be happy to discuss general trends, though the technical details are where the real transformation lies. Of course, he agreed quickly, clearly relieved I hadn't launched into explanations beyond his comprehension. Though, at the end of the day, these new platforms will need traditional legal expertise to scale properly. That's where families like ours provide the essential foundation. The irony of his statement, articulated mere days before Nexus would announce technology specifically designed to circumvent that traditional expertise, was not lost on me. But I merely nodded, allowing him to elaborate on his outdated understanding while Marshall Cartwright awaited his turn to impress the supposedly underachieving Walsh daughter with his recent appellate court victory. From across the table, my mother watched these interactions with approving attention, clearly pleased that I was fulfilling my designated role as attentive audience to men she deemed worthy potential partners. What she couldn't possibly know was that both the Harrington Foundation and Cartwright's firm had unknowingly invested in Nexus subsidiaries through blind funding structures, effectively financing the very disruption that would challenge their traditional business models. As dinner progressed toward the inevitable speeches celebrating my father's contributions to corporate law, I found myself increasingly aware of the parallel realities I was navigating, the surface performance of the dutiful, if disappointing, daughter alongside my private knowledge of Monday's impending revelation, not with vindictive anticipation, but with a clear-eyed recognition that these carefully maintained social and legal hierarchies were about to experience significant realignment. When the time came for family tributes, Nathan delivered his expected eloquent testament to our father's mentorship and vision. His speech highlighted the Walsh legacy of legal leadership, emphasizing continuity and the values that had positioned the family at the center of corporate governance for generations. The gathered guests nodded appreciatively, recognizing their shared commitment to preserving these established systems of influence and power. The journey from seeking the Walsh validation to recognizing its irrelevance had been the true transformation. Nexus had emerged from that freedom, the clarity that came from defining success on my own terms rather than achieving predetermined markers on someone else's path. "Maybe you're right," I conceded. "So what will you wear to this dinner?" she asked, returning to her persistent concern with my deliberate downplaying of my success. I laughed. "I haven't decided." "Something that honors who you actually are," she suggested. "Not necessarily announcing your success, but not hiding from it either. She hesitated before adding, "Olivia, whatever happens Monday, tomorrow night, is the last time you'll experience your family dynamics the way they've always been. Once the announcement goes public, everything changes. How they see you, how you relate to them, how the world positions you in relation to the Walsh legacy." "I know," I said quietly. "So maybe," she continued carefully, "instead of treating it as either a performance of the role they've assigned you or some dramatic reveal of who you've become, you could just be authentically present. Neither hiding nor announcing, just being exactly who you are before everything shifts." I considered her suggestion, recognizing its wisdom. For years, my family interactions had been carefully managed performances, deliberately understating my work, intentionally fulfilling their low expectations, strategically accepting the role of disappointment. There had been freedom in that, separation, but also a subtle cost. "I'll think about it," I promised. After Mira left, I remained in the conference room, looking out over the Brooklyn skyline. Somewhere across the East River stood the Walsh & Partners headquarters, its logo illuminated against the sky as it had been throughout my childhood, the physical manifestation of the legacy I had been simultaneously born into and excluded from. By Monday afternoon, that same building would house partners frantically assessing how Nexus Legal AI would transform their operations. Emergency meetings would be convened, strategic responses formulated, client communications drafted, and somewhere, in that scramble of adaptation, my father would discover that the daughter he had dismissed as lacking the Walsh drive had actually reimagined it for a new era. I felt no triumph in this prospect, no vindictive satisfaction. What I felt instead was a calm certainty, not that I had proven them wrong, but that I had proven myself right. The vision they couldn't understand had manifested despite their doubts, not to refute them, but because it needed to exist. As I gathered my things to leave, I received a text from my mother. "Please arrive promptly at 7 tomorrow. Appropriate attire expected. The Harringtons will be seated at your table. James. Specifically requested your company." I smiled at this familiar attempt at matchmaking, this persistent belief that my value lay in strategic alignment with another family dynasty. After Monday, such arrangements would take on an entirely different dimension, less a rescue of the disappointing daughter and more a calculated alliance with the woman who had transformed modern legal practice. But that was Monday. Tomorrow night, for the last time, I would enter the Walsh estate as they had always seen me, not as performance, or pretense, but as Mira had suggested, authentically present in the final hours before everything changed. The evening of my father's 70th birthday celebration arrived with the kind of perfect early autumn weather that seemed specifically arranged for Walsh family occasions. As my car approached the wrought iron gates of the estate, I felt a curious sense of calm, a stark contrast to the nervous anticipation that had typically accompanied my returns to this place in recent years. I had taken Mira's advice regarding my appearance, choosing neither the intentionally understated attire of previous family functions, nor anything that overtly signaled my success. Instead, I wore a simple but impeccably tailored black dress from an emerging designer whose company I had quietly funded, paired with a single piece of jewelry, my grandmother's vintage emerald pendant, the only Walsh heirloom I had ever truly connected with, given to me on my 16th birthday before. My perceived divergence from family expectations had begun. The estate looked exactly as it always had, sprawling federal architecture illuminated by strategic lighting that enhanced its imposing symmetry, manicured grounds that required a full-time staff of 6 to maintain, imported gravel on the circular, driveway that crunched satisfyingly beneath tires and designer heels. The familiar setting for countless Walsh celebrations, each meticulously orchestrated to reinforce the family mythology of uninterrupted excellence and influence. When my turn came, the obligatory 90 seconds my mother had allocated, I approached the microphone with a calm centeredness that felt significantly different from the tense performances of previous family functions. My father, I began, meeting his gaze across the room, taught me that true leadership isn't about maintaining systems that already work for you. It's about creating systems that work for everyone. I paused, watching my father's slight smile at this characterization, one that highlighted an aspect of his philosophy that his peers often overlooked in favor of his courtroom achievements. While many know Jonathan Walsh as a titan of corporate law, I've had the privilege of seeing him as a man who values innovation even when it challenges convention, who respects determination even when it follows unexpected paths, who measures success not by conformity to established patterns, but by the courage to envision new possibilities. My mother's expression had shifted from initial approval to slight confusion. This wasn't the standard acknowledgement of Walsh excellence she had anticipated. My father, however, was listening with genuine interest, recognition flickering in his eyes as I articulated a dimension of his character that family mythology rarely emphasized. The greatest gift my father gave me wasn't access to legal networks or introduction to influential circles, I continued. It was the understanding that meaningful impact often requires questioning the very foundations others take for granted. That lesson has shaped my work more profoundly than any specific legal principle. I raised my glass. To Jonathan Walsh. Not just for what he has built, but for creating space for others to build differently. For understanding that legacies aren't preserved through rigid protection of what exists, but through courageous evolution toward what might be possible. The room applauded with the polite enthusiasm expected for a daughter's tribute, though I noticed thoughtful expressions on several faces, recognition that my characterization had highlighted dimensions of my father less frequently celebrated in these circles. My mother's slight frown suggested she found my comments insufficiently conventional, while my father's expression held genuine appreciation and perhaps a touch of curiosity about the work I had obliquely referenced. As I returned to my seat, James Harrington leaned toward me with renewed interest. That was unexpected. You sound almost like you're involved in something transformational. I smiled. Everyone's work transforms something, doesn't it? The question is merely scale and direction. Well said, he replied, clearly filing away this interaction for reconsideration. Perhaps we've underestimated your ambitions, Olivia. Perhaps, I agreed mildly. Perception often lags behind reality. By Monday afternoon, he would understand just how prophetic that observation had been. After the speeches concluded, the celebration transitioned to the estate's grand ballroom for dancing and continued networking, that subtle but essential activity that had powered the Walsh influence for generations. Orchestral arrangements of classic standards provided the soundtrack for carefully calibrated social interactions, each conversation potentially advancing business interests under the guise of celebration. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, observing this choreography with the perspective of someone simultaneously inside and outside the system. My mother moved through the crowd with practiced elegance, making strategic introductions and reinforcing key relationships. My father accepted congratulations with the gracious humility that had made him respected even by opponents. Nathan expertly balanced deference to established power with hints of his own emerging influence, the perfect heir apparent. Your speech was interesting, came my father's voice as he appeared beside me, momentarily escaped from his admirers. Not the standard Walsh tribute. I smiled. Was that a compliment or an observation? Both, I think. He studied me with genuine curiosity. You highlighted aspects of my approach that most people in this room have never noticed. Perhaps because they see what they expect to see, I suggested. The successful attorney, the courtroom tactician, the legal strategist, rather than the man who taught his daughter to question systems, not just master them. My father considered this assessment, sipping his scotch contemplatively. Your mother worries about you, you know. Mother worries about how I reflect on the Walsh image. I corrected gently. Not the same thing. He didn't disagree. She wants security for you, success as she understands it. I know, I acknowledged, and I'm not angry about that anymore. She's operating from her own framework, her own understanding of what matters. And what about you, Olivia? He asked, his tone carrying genuine interest rather than the dismissive quality my mother might have used. Are you finding what matters to you in this consulting work of yours? I met his gaze directly. I am, more than I could have imagined. Something in my certainty caught his attention, prompting closer scrutiny. You've changed. There's a solidity to you that's new, a foundation that wasn't there before. Building something meaningful will do that, I replied simply. He nodded, slowly. I wish you'd tell me more about this work. Not because I doubt it, but because I'm genuinely curious about what captures my daughter's formidable intelligence and determination. The sincerity in his request made me consider, for a brief moment, giving him advance warning about Monday's announcement. Not for strategic advantage, but as a gesture of the connection we'd maintained despite my deviation from the expected path. Before I could respond, my mother approached, her social radar, having detected our extended conversation. Jonathan, the Second Circuit judges are looking for you. Something about the Thompson precedent. She turned to me with practiced efficiency. Olivia, James is asking about you again. Do try to show more interest. The Harrington litigation portfolio would pair exceptionally well with your father's corporate practice. The irony of her statement, made days before Nexus would announce technology that would fundamentally transform litigation strategy, almost prompted an uncharacteristic laugh. Instead, I maintained my composed expression. I'll keep that in mind. Mother. See that you do, she replied, already scanning the room for her next strategic intervention. Opportunities like James don't present themselves indefinitely, particularly for someone with your unconventional career choices. As she guided my father away, he glanced back with a slight apologetic smile, our familiar exchange whenever my mother's bluntness crossed into unnecessary critique. I returned the smile, feeling a new kind of compassion for them both. They were products of a system they had mastered, unable to recognize that the ground beneath that system was already shifting. I made my way onto the terrace, seeking a moment of quiet before rejoining the celebration. The September evening had turned pleasantly cool, stars visible beyond the glow of the estate's lighting. From this vantage point, the manicured gardens stretched toward the property line, the impeccable organization of nature that had always symbolized the Walsh approach to the world. Everything in its proper place, all elements controlled and directed toward a specific vision of success. Escaping already? Came Nathan's voice as he joined me by the stone balustrade. Can't say I blame you. Mother's practically writing wedding invitations for you and James. I laughed. She'd be disappointed. She usually is, he observed wryly. At least when it comes to you. Though I noticed something different tonight. You seem less affected by her expectations. More, I don't know, self-contained. Good description, I acknowledged. I found there's freedom in recognizing that someone else's measuring stick doesn't have to be your own. He considered this, loosening his bow tie slightly. You know what's strange? For all her criticism of your choices, you're the only one of us who seems genuinely at peace. Father's constantly concerned about the firm's position against emerging competitors. I'm always trying to prove I deserve the Walsh mantle, and Mother's perpetually worried about maintaining our standing. But you, he gestured toward me, you carry none of that weight. His observation was surprisingly perceptive. That's because I stopped trying to succeed on terms that weren't meaningful to me. Once you define success for yourself, other people's assessments become interesting data points rather than defining verdicts. Very philosophical, he noted with a half smile. Though I imagine it's easier to be philosophical when you're not responsible for a multi-generational legacy. The weight of legacy is a choice, Nathan, I said gently. One you've made consciously, and I respect that. But it's still a choice, not an inevitability. He leaned against the balustrade, looking back toward the illuminated ballroom where generations of legal influence danced and networked. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I just walked away. Did something completely different, something that mattered beyond precedents and billable hours. You could find out, I suggested. He laughed without humor. Not according to Mother. The way she describes it, my adherence to the predetermined path is all that stands between our family and complete social and financial ruin. And yet here, I am, the family disappointment, and somehow the world continues turning, I observed with a smile. Here you are indeed, Nathan agreed, studying me with renewed curiosity. Successfully doing something that none of us quite understands. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Which reminds me, I heard Judge Keller complaining about a mysterious legal technology platform that's causing massive concern among traditional firms. Something about disintermediation of established legal processes. Sounded terribly innovative and threatening to the old guard. I maintained a neutral expression, though internally I noted that word of nexus had begun circulating even before the official announcement. The legal world is always evolving. Innovation is inevitable, I remarked mildly. It is, he agreed, still watching me carefully. The interesting part was when he mentioned rumors that a major announcement was coming Monday. Something that would fundamentally realign access to legal expertise, whatever that means. Sounds dramatic. It does, he agreed, still studying my face. Almost as dramatic as my brilliant sister who supposedly failed in business now advising on cutting-edge legal technology while saying cryptic things about defining success on her own terms. I met his gaze with a small smile. It's you, isn't it? He asked quietly. Whatever's coming Monday, you're connected to it somehow. Instead of answering directly, I asked, do you remember when we were children and Father would take us to the office on Saturdays? How you would immediately go to his desk and start organizing his briefs while I would wander around asking questions about why the legal system worked the way it did. He nodded. You drove the partners crazy, always asking why they couldn't do things differently. That curiosity never went away, I said simply. I just found different places to apply it. Nathan was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of what I hadn't quite said. Whatever it is you've built, Olivia, is it good? I mean, does it matter beyond disruption for disruption's sake? The question touched me with its sincerity. Beneath the polished wall share was still my younger brother, concerned with more than legal precedent. It matters, I assured him. It makes legal expertise more accessible to people who have been systematically excluded. It reduces artificial barriers that benefit institutions at the expense of individuals. It creates more transparent pathways for justice to reach those who need it most. That sounds... He hesitated, searching for the right word. Important. It is, I confirmed. More important than proving anything to anyone about my worth or capability. He nodded slowly, then glanced back toward the ballroom. Mother's looking for you. Probably for another strategic introduction. I should go back in, I agreed. One last evening of being exactly who they expect me to be. And after tonight? He raised an eyebrow. I smiled. After tonight, expectations will need to adjust to reality rather than the other way around. As we returned to the celebration, I found myself approached not by James Harrington, but by his father, Richard, the patriarch of the Harrington fortune and a contemporary of my father's in the legal establishment. Olivia, he greeted me, with the particular tone reserved for the underachieving offspring of peers. I understand you've been doing some work in legal technology. Consulting, is it? Among other things, I confirmed pleasantly. Fascinating field, he continued, his tone suggesting it was anything but. Though between us, I think there's excessive concern about these so-called disruptive platforms. The legal infrastructure that families like ours have built over generations isn't so easily displaced by algorithms and digital interfaces. I nodded thoughtfully. That's certainly one perspective. The realistic perspective, he corrected with paternal condescension. Client relationships, legal expertise, courtroom experience. These are built on trust developed over decades, institutional knowledge passed through generations. No technology platform can replicate that fundamental human element. Perhaps not replicate, I acknowledged, but possibly reimagine it in more inclusive forms. He waved this away as youthful idealism. Inclusion is a lovely concept for pro bono initiatives, my dear, but the serious machinery of corporate law requires gatekeepers and established pathways. That's not exclusion, it's necessary structure. I wondered briefly how this conversation would differ if we were having it on Tuesday rather than Saturday, after the Nexus announcement had revealed my role in creating exactly the kind of platform he was dismissing, and after the market had begun responding to its implications for his industry. Structure can evolve while maintaining integrity, I suggested. Sometimes the most effective innovations preserve what works while transforming what doesn't. Spoken like someone with limited experience in actual legal practice, he replied with an indulgent smile. No offense intended, of course. Your father and I have simply witnessed too many supposed revolutions that ultimately required the stability our institutions provide. No offense taken, I assured him with genuine equanimity. Monday will be interesting, he raised an eyebrow. Markets are always interesting at the beginning of the week. I meant in the legal world, I clarified smoothly. New possibilities, fresh perspectives. As Richard Harrington was called away by another guest, I caught my mother watching our interaction with obvious disappointment, likely interpreting my failure to impress the Harrington patriarch as another missed opportunity for advantageous connection. What none of them could possibly know was that by Monday afternoon, the dynamic between our families would be fundamentally altered. Not by strategic marriage, but by technological disruption that would reposition the very foundations of their influence. For now, though, I continued playing my assigned role for the remainder of the evening, the underachieving daughter making a respectful appearance at her father's celebration. I accepted the subtle condescension from family friends who asked vague questions about my little consulting business, with the same pleasant detachment I'd cultivated for years. I deflected my mother's increasingly transparent attempts to position me advantageously for James Harrington's attention. But beneath this familiar performance ran a quiet current of anticipation, not for vindication or recognition, but for the freedom Monday would bring. Freedom from pretense, from strategic diminishment, from the careful management of others' perceptions. After years of intentional separation between my family identity and my professional reality, the coming announcement would finally align these worlds, not through my seeking validation, but through the natural emergence of undeniable truth. As the evening drew to a close and guests began departing, my father found me again, this time with a gift. A small box carefully wrapped in silver paper with the Walsh family crest embossed on the cover. A little something to remember tonight, he explained as I accepted it. Perhaps not as conventional as your mother might prefer, but I thought it suited you better. Inside was not the typical Walsh gift of family jewelry or symbolic heirloom, but a beautifully crafted compass in a sterling silver case. Its cover was inscribed with words from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. I looked up in surprise, genuinely touched by the unexpected sentiment. I may not fully understand the path you've chosen, Olivia, my father said quietly. but I've always respected your determination to define it for yourself." The sincerity in his voice created a moment of connection that transcended our professional divergence. A recognition that beneath the Walsh legacy and expectations existed a simpler relationship between a father and daughter. "Thank you," I said simply, the words encompassing more than just gratitude for the gift. He nodded, understanding the broader acknowledgement. "Whatever you're building, I hope it matters. Not to the Walsh name or to legal standing, but to you. That's the success that counts in the end." As he rejoined my mother to bid farewell to the remaining guests, I held the compass in my palm, feeling its weight and significance. For all the limitations of the Walsh definition of success, my father had just demonstrated that evolution was possible, that even those deeply embedded in established systems could recognize the value of charting new directions. Monday would bring inevitable transformation to these carefully maintained family dynamics, but tonight had offered something unexpected, a glimpse of connection that might survive that transformation, a relationship that could potentially bridge between worlds I had long assumed were irreconcilable. As I prepared to leave, my mother approached for a final assessment. "You managed not to embarrass us tonight," she observed, her version of approval. "Though you could have shown more interest in James. He's considering 3 potential judicial appointments, all of which would complement your father's practice nicely. I'm sure James will make advantageous choices regardless of my interest," I replied evenly. She sighed with practiced martyrdom. "Olivia, when will you recognize that your position in this family carries responsibilities? Connections aren't merely social, they're foundational to maintaining influence. Your continued disinterest in strategic relationships reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how our world operates." I studied my mother, her perfect posture, her flawless appearance, her absolute certainty in a perspective that had never been challenged, and found myself responding not with the familiar tension of unmet expectations, but with genuine compassion for the limitations of her understanding. "Perhaps," I suggested gently, "there are multiple ways for worlds to operate successfully. Philosophy won't secure your future," she countered briskly. I smiled. "My future is already secure, Mother, just not in the form you've imagined." Something in my certainty gave her pause, prompting a more careful assessment than her typical dismissal. "You're different tonight, more settled." "I am settled," I confirmed. "Comfortable with the path I've chosen and what I've built along it." "And what exactly have you built, Olivia?" she asked, genuine curiosity momentarily overriding her customary judgment. "This consulting work, is it actually providing the stability and position you deserve as a Walsh?" I considered how to answer, knowing that within 48 hours this question would be answered more definitively than any explanation I could offer now. "What I've built," I said carefully, "is aligned with values I believe in. It creates meaningful impact while providing more than sufficient resources. Most importantly, it represents an authentic expression of my capabilities and vision rather than an inherited definition of success." She frowned slightly, parsing this response for concrete indicators of achievement by her metrics. Finding none that registered, she returned to more familiar ground. "Well, I suppose there's always the possibility of an advantageous marriage to provide the structure your career choices lack." Rather than feeling the familiar frustration at this reduction of my value to marriage potential, I felt a curious lightness, the freedom of recognizing that her limited perspective would soon confront evidence it could not dismiss. "We should all remain open to life's unexpected developments," I agreed with genuine equanimity. "Monday often brings fresh perspectives." Sunday passed with deceptive tranquility, the calm before Monday's inevitable storm. I spent the day reviewing final announcement details with my team via secure video conference, each element meticulously prepared for a revelation that would reshape the legal landscape. By evening, everything was in place for the 9 a.m. announcement that would connect Olivia Walsh, family disappointment, with the brilliant legal innovator behind Nexus Legal AI. Monday morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of pristine, September day that seemed too perfect for ordinary business. I dressed with deliberate intention, a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority without ostentation, simple pearl earrings that had been my first significant purchase after selling, Horizon, and my grandmother's emerald pendant as a private reminder of continuity amid transformation. "The press packets go out in 30 minutes, Mira reported during our 7:00 a.m. call. "Legal networks are already speculating about a major disruptive announcement in the corporate law sector. The market's buzzing." "And Walsh and Partners?" I asked, the question I'd carefully avoided throughout our preparations. "Set to receive the standard institutional notification at 8:00 a.m., along with all other major legal entities," she confirmed. "Though I should mention our sources indicate that Richard Harrington has been making urgent calls since yesterday evening. Apparently your conversation at the party prompted some concerns." I smiled slightly. Not surprising. He was quite confident in dismissing legal technology as a passing trend with limited impact on established institutions. "A perspective that will age particularly poorly by this afternoon," Mira noted with satisfaction. "Are you ready for this, Olivia? Once the announcement goes live, there's no more separation between worlds. The carefully constructed barrier between Olivia Walsh and the legal revolutionary disappears forever." "I'm ready," I confirmed, surprised by the absolute certainty I felt. It was never about hiding permanently, just about creating space, to build something authentic, something that would be evaluated on its own merits, rather than as an extension of or reaction to the Walsh name. "Mission accomplished, then," Mira said warmly. "The valuation speaks for itself. No one can claim nepotism or family connections when you've built this entirely outside their systems and influence." At precisely 8:00 a.m., the formal notifications went out to major legal institutions worldwide, including Walsh and Partners, a simple factual briefing document outlining Nexus Legal AI's technology platform, its successfully completed acquisition of key infrastructure components, and its implications for traditional legal practice. At the bottom, listed among the executive leadership, Olivia Walsh, founder and chief executive officer. I imagined the document arriving in my father's email, pictured him scanning it with the efficiency of someone who had reviewed countless legal briefs over decades, envisioned the moment of recognition when my name registered not as his underachieving daughter, but as the architect of a system that would fundamentally transform his industry. At 8:17 a.m., my phone rang. My father's private line. I answered with calm certainty. "Good morning, Father." A brief silence then. "Nexus Legal AI." His voice carried neither anger nor shock, but a measured assessment I recognized from countless legal discussions throughout my childhood. "Your consulting work, I presume?" "Yes," I confirmed simply. Another pause. "The Singapore acquisition that's been causing ripples in international law for months. That was you?" "That was us," I corrected gently. "I have an exceptional team." "Valued at." I heard paper rustling as he referenced the document, $7 billion after the acquisition closes. With technology that essentially disintermediates traditional legal counsel for cross-border transactions and corporate formation. His tone held the growing recognition of what this actually meant, both for the industry and for his perception of his daughter. "That's the simplest explanation, yes." "Olivia," he said finally, "why didn't you tell me? All these years when your mother and I thought—" He stopped, recalibrating. "When we believed you were struggling to find direction." The question was fair, asked without accusation. I needed to build this independently, I explained, not as a Walsh venture or with Walsh connections. Nexus's success needed to stand entirely on its own merits without the distortion of family legacy or influence. "I understand that," he acknowledged, surprising me. But even after you'd achieved initial success, the Series A funding, the early growth, why maintain the separation? I considered how to articulate what had evolved from necessary independence to strategic advantage. Being underestimated created freedom, Father. Operating without scrutiny or external expectations allowed us to develop approaches that might have been dismissed within traditional frameworks. The separation wasn't about rejecting the Walsh name, it was about creating space for innovation that existing systems couldn't envision. His thoughtful silence suggested he was processing this perspective with genuine consideration. The platform description, democratization of legal expertise, algorithmic interpretation of precedent, AI-driven document analysis, these aren't just technological innovations. They're philosophical challenges to how our profession has operated for generations. Yes, I confirmed. The technology enables the philosophy, but the philosophy drives the technology. Legal expertise shouldn't be concentrated based on existing advantage. It should be expanded based on genuine need for justice. Another pause, longer this time, then with genuine curiosity. Does it work? Not just technically, but practically. Can these systems actually deliver the access and efficiency they promise without sacrificing necessary protections? The question revealed why my father had maintained respect throughout a profession often characterized by self-interest and resistance to change. Unlike many of his peers, he remained genuinely interested in whether new approaches might legitimately improve existing systems, not just in defending those systems against change. It works, I assured him. We've run parallel implementations alongside traditional structures for 18 months. The results are compelling enough that even conventional institutions will need to adapt rather than resist. Including Walsh and partners, he observed, the reality of his position in this transformation becoming clearer. Including Walsh and partners, I confirmed gently. Though your existing relationships and expertise remain valuable, they just need to operate within evolved systems. He was quiet again, and I could almost see him at his desk in the Walsh and Partners headquarters, the familiar skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, processing how fundamentally the ground beneath that view was shifting. Your mother is going to find this challenging, he said finally, with masterful understatement that prompted a genuine laugh from me. I imagine she will, I agreed, though perhaps not for the reasons one might expect. Oh? Mother's primary concern has always been the Walsh position and influence, I explained. Nexus doesn't diminish that, it transforms it. The question is whether she can recognize influence in new forms rather than clinging to old definitions. A question for all of us in this profession, my father acknowledged thoughtfully. Olivia, he hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic uncertainty. I'm not entirely sure what the appropriate response is here. As your father, I'm proud. Seems an insufficient word for what you've built. As the managing partner of a legal institution whose operations your technology will fundamentally disrupt, I'm admittedly concerned. As someone who has spent a lifetime believing in certain structures that you're now challenging, I'm reconsidering assumptions I've held as foundational. His honesty touched me deeply, the willingness to acknowledge complexity rather than retreat into defensive certainty. All of those responses make sense, I assured him. This isn't about personal victory or institutional defeat. It's about necessary evolution. The legal world doesn't need to discard everything that came before. Just adapt to what comes next. What comes next? He repeated thoughtfully. Olivia, before the official announcement, may I ask one question, as your father rather than as Jonathan Walsh of Walsh and Partners? Of course. Are you happy? Not successful or influential or innovative, though you are clearly all of those things, but actually satisfied with the path you've created? The question revealed what ultimately mattered to him beyond professional standing or family legacy, and I could answer with complete honesty. Yes. Building something aligned with my values, working with people who share that vision, creating impact that extends beyond wealth accumulation. It's brought a fulfillment that following the expected path never could have. I heard him exhale slowly. Then regardless of how the markets respond today, or how your mother processes this revelation, I need you to know that I'm genuinely proud of you, not because of the valuation or the innovation, but because you had the courage to define success on your own terms. Before I could respond, I heard a commotion in the background, voices rising in his office, the distinctive clip of my mother's heels approaching with purpose. "I believe your mother has just received the notification," my father observed dryly. "Should I let you go?" "Perhaps that would be wise," I agreed, "though I suspect you'll be hearing from her directly momentarily." As we ended the call, I felt a surprising lightness, not vindication or triumph, but the simple relief of alignment between worlds that had been carefully separated for years. My father's response had been neither the defensive rejection I had half expected nor the immediate celebration that would have rung false, but something more valuable, genuine recognition of what I had built coupled with honest acknowledgement of its implications. I had barely set down my phone when it rang again. Not my mother as anticipated, but Nathan. "Olivia Walsh, legal revolutionary," he greeted me, his tone blending surprise with admiration. The notifications just hit Walsh and Partners. Father's office looks like a war room, and mother is, well, processing would be a generous description. I smiled at his characterization. I just spoke with father. He was thoughtful, measured, genuinely interested in understanding the technology and its implications. That's father, always the strategist, looking 3 moves ahead even when the board has been overturned. Nathan paused. Mother, however, is operating on a different timeline, currently somewhere between denial and, actually, I'm not sure there's a name for what's happening. She keeps saying there must be some mistake, that the Olivia Walsh listed as founder and CEO must be someone else with the same name. Despite the seriousness of the moment, I couldn't help laughing. Classic mother. When reality doesn't conform to her expectations, reality must be mistaken. "She's on her way to your office," Nathan warned. "Or where she thinks your office is. That consulting space you've maintained as a front in Midtown. She's determined to sort out this confusion before the announcement goes public." "Well, she won't find me there," I noted calmly. The official announcement happens in 18 minutes from Nexus headquarters in Williamsburg, followed by the opening bell ceremony. At the exchange, Nathan whistled low. "You're ringing the opening bell? That's symbolic," I corrected. "A recognition that legal systems are entering a new phase." "A phase you're leading," he observed. "Olivia, all these years when mother was dismissing your work and I was feeling guilty about following the Walsh path, while you supposedly struggled, you were building something revolutionary." "I wasn't struggling," I assured him. "I was just building differently than expected." There was a brief pause before he asked, "Does Nexus have a position for a reformed traditional lawyer? Someone who knows the old systems intimately but is increasingly convinced they need transformation?" His question surprised me, suggesting that the revelation wasn't just changing how they perceived me, but potentially how Nathan viewed his own path. "We're always looking for people who understand both where legal practice has been and where it needs to go," I replied carefully. "Though I'd want you to be certain about your motivations. Working at Nexus wouldn't be about rejecting the Walsh legacy. It would be about evolving it." "I've been questioning my path for longer than you realize," he admitted. "Not the work itself, but the narrowness of its impact. What you said last night about legacy being a choice, not an inevitability, it resonated more than you know. Before, I could respond. My phone signaled another incoming call. My mother this time. Her name flashing on the screen with an urgency that seemed to transcend the digital interface. "Mother is calling," I told Nathan. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck," he replied with newfound respect. "You've already won. She just doesn't know it yet." I switched calls, answering with composed neutrality. "Good morning, Mother." "Olivia," she began, her voice tightly controlled. "There appears to be some bizarre confusion happening at your father's office. Something about a technology company with a preposterous valuation and someone using your name as its founder. I'm on my way to your office to address this before it becomes an embarrassing situation for the family." The fact that she could interpret the situation only as identity theft, rather than actual achievement, revealed the depth of her certainty that I was incapable of significant success. In the past, this dismissal might have stung. Now it merely highlighted how completely perception could diverge from reality when filtered through rigid expectations. "There's no confusion, Mother," I replied calmly. "Nexus Legal AI is my company. I founded it 3 years ago after selling Horizon, the failed venture as you've called it, though the sale actually provided the seed funding for what became Nexus." Silence followed, then. "That's not possible." "Not probable by your assessment," I corrected gently. "But entirely possible, as the documentation you've received confirms." "But—" I could almost see her struggling to integrate this information with her established narrative. "You've been working as a consultant, living in Brooklyn, disconnected from proper legal circles. I've been building a legal technology platform that now facilitates transactions for institutions across 23 countries, I clarified. Living in a property I own outright in Dumbo, and creating new legal circles rather than seeking admission to existing ones." The silence extended, punctuated only by what sounded like her car coming to a stop, presumably outside the decoy office she believed I occupied. $4.7 billion, she finally said, the figure apparently the only concrete detail she could grasp from the dissolution of her certainties. "After the Singapore acquisition closes this morning?" "Yes," I confirmed. Though the valuation was never the objective, the systemic transformation is what matters. Another extended silence, then with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Why didn't you tell us?" The question echoed my father's but came from an entirely different place, less about understanding my reasoning and more about processing what this revelation meant for her carefully constructed narrative about her disappointing daughter. "I needed to build Nexus independently," I explained, "without the Walsh influence or connections creating distortions in how it was perceived and developed. But after it became successful," she pressed, "why maintain the pretense? Why allow me, to believe you were underachieving when you were actually—" She couldn't quite articulate the scale of her misperception. "It wasn't about deception," I assured her. "It was about creating space for authentic development. And perhaps," I added with gentle honesty, "about recognizing that your assessment of my worth wasn't something I needed to correct. Your perception of me was yours to maintain or reconsider." The silence that followed suggested she was confronting not just the reality of my success, but the deeper implication that her judgment had become irrelevant to my sense of achievement, that I had built something significant without seeking her approval or validation. "The announcement," she said finally, her voice regaining some of its customary precision. "It's happening soon?" "9 Yagi," I confirmed, followed by the opening bell. "Ceremony at the exchange." "You're ringing the opening bell," she repeated, the symbolic weight of this tradition clearly registering. She had attended numerous such ceremonies beside my father over decades, each marking significant moments in Walsh & Partners' expansion. Now her supposedly underachieving daughter would stand in that same spot, representing not an extension of the Walsh legacy, but a transformation of the systems that had defined it. Yes, I confirmed simply. Another pause, then with renewed determination. We should be there, your father and I. The family should present a united front for an achievement of this magnitude. The request revealed how quickly she was pivoting from dismissing my capability to recognizing the advantage of association, from questioning the possibility of my success to positioning it within the Walsh narrative. Classic Eleanor Walsh adaptation, recalibrating to maintain position even as the ground shifted beneath her carefully arranged world. This isn't about the Walsh United Front, I replied gently but firmly. Nexus succeeded because it operated independently from established systems, including family legacy. The announcement needs to maintain that clarity. But surely, she began, then stopped, perhaps recognizing the fundamental shift in dynamic between us. I was no longer the daughter seeking approval or acceptance into the Walsh definition of success. I had created my own definition and manifested it so substantially that the traditional power structure between us had been irrevocably altered. I understand, she said finally, the words clearly unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Will you at least allow us to acknowledge the achievement appropriately? Perhaps a dinner at the estate once the announcement has been properly managed? I smiled at this characteristic attempt to regain control through social orchestration. We can discuss appropriate acknowledgement later. Right now, I need to focus on the announcement and its immediate implications for the legal marketplace. Of course, she agreed with unexpected deference. Olivia, she hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic uncertainty. I may have misunderstood certain aspects of your professional development. Coming from Eleanor Walsh, this was the equivalent of a full apology and admission of error, a seismic shift in her carefully maintained certainty about my limitations. Perspectives evolve when new information becomes available, I replied, diplomatically, offering her a graceful framework for adjusting her position without requiring explicit acknowledgement of how completely she had misjudged my capability and achievement. As we ended the call, I felt neither triumph nor vindication in her recalibration, but something more valuable, the freedom of having worlds finally align, of no longer navigating between carefully separated identities, of standing fully in the integration of who I had become through the journey of building something meaningful on my own terms. When my phone rang again moments later, I expected further family processing. Instead, it was Mira, her voice carrying the controlled excitement of imminent revelation. The exchange is ready. Legal networks are speculating wildly. Our team is in position. She paused. How did it go with your family? Better than expected, I replied truthfully. Father was thoughtful and genuinely interested in understanding the innovation. Mother is recalibrating rapidly. And how are you feeling? 10 minutes until the world connects Olivia Walsh, family disappointment, with the legal revolutionary behind Nexus. I considered the question seriously, taking stock of my internal state with the same clarity I'd applied to building Nexus. Ready, I said finally. Not for vindication or recognition, but for integration, for bringing together worlds that have been artificially separated, for standing fully in what we've created and its potential for meaningful transformation. Then let's make some history, Mira said warmly. Your car is waiting downstairs. As I gathered my things and prepared to leave for the announcement that would forever alter my relationship with the Walsh legacy, I caught sight of my reflection in the window, not the carefully diminished version of myself I had presented at family functions, nor the strategically separated identity I had maintained professionally, but the integrated reality of who I had become through the journey of defining success on my own terms. Olivia Walsh, who had transformed limitation into opportunity, who had converted underestimation into strategic advantage, who had built something meaningful, not despite rejection, but because of the freedom it provided to envision possibilities beyond conventional understanding. the woman who would soon stand at the center of the legal world, not because she had embraced the Walsh legacy, but because she had reimagined what legacy truly meant. The transformation from private achievement to public recognition happened with breathtaking speed. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the coordinated announcement of Nexus Legal AI's Singapore acquisition and revolutionary legal platform hit every major business and legal network simultaneously. Legal analysts who had been speculating about mysterious disruptions in corporate law suddenly had concrete details, not just about the technology that would transform global legal infrastructure, but about its creator. Nexus Legal AI, the AI legal technology platform valued at $4.7 billion after this morning's Singapore acquisition, was founded by Olivia Walsh, the CNBC anchor announced, her professional composure momentarily slipping as she processed the significance. Yes, that Olivia Walsh, daughter of Jonathan Walsh Sr., chairman of Walsh & Partners, one of the traditional law firms whose business model Nexus's technology directly challenges. The car television displayed real-time market reactions as we moved through Manhattan toward the exchange. Legal technology stocks experienced immediate upward pressure while traditional law firm holdings dropped sharply. Analysts scrambled to reconcile previously dismissed disruptive threats with the sudden revelation that they had materialized not from some unknown startup, but from within the family lineage of legal royalty. The implications are seismic. A Bloomberg legal analyst explained to viewers. Nexus's platform essentially bypasses traditional legal gatekeepers for cross-border corporate formation and transaction documentation. But perhaps more significant is who created it. Olivia Walsh has effectively reimagined the very systems her family helped establish over generations. As we neared the exchange, my phone lit up with messages from industry leaders, venture capitalists, former skeptics, and curious connections, all suddenly discovering that the underachieving Walsh daughter had been quietly building one of the most valuable legal technology platforms in the world. James Harrington's message stood out among them. Olivia, I owe you a profound apology for my presumptions Saturday evening. Father has called an emergency partners meeting to discuss Nexus's implications for our litigation practice. Would value your insights when time permits. The shift in tone from condescending potential suitor to respectful industry peer captured the fundamental realignment triggered by the morning's revelation. Contexts that had been artificially separated were now colliding, creating new possibilities for engagement beyond inherited expectations. Mira met me at the exchange entrance, her typically composed demeanor brightened by satisfaction. Legal Twitter is imploding, she reported as we moved through security. Half the traditional law firm partners are scrambling to explain how they missed this development, and the other half are trying to downplay the implications while simultaneously advising clients to adapt immediately. And Walsh & Partners? I asked, the question I had been carefully avoiding. Down 6% in pre-market trading, she confirmed. Though interestingly, they've already issued a statement acknowledging Nexus's innovation and signaling openness to strategic adaptation. Your father moves quickly. This proactive response didn't surprise me. Jonathan Walsh Sr. had maintained his position through decades of legal evolution by recognizing shifts early and adapting strategically rather than resisting defensively. While many of his peers would spend today in denial or dismissal, he was already positioning Walsh & Partners for integration with the new reality. The exchange trading floor buzzed with unusual energy. Legal markets thrived on information advantages and structural certainties, and Nexus had just disrupted both. As I was escorted toward the balcony overlooking the trading floor, I noticed the gathered financial press studying me with intense curiosity, trying to reconcile the composed woman in a tailored suit with both the revolutionary legal platform and the supposedly disappointing Walsh daughter they'd occasionally glimpsed at industry events. 2 minutes to the opening bell, a floor director advised, positioning me near the ceremonial button that would officially open the day's trading, AI. Day that would fundamentally transform the industry my family had helped shape for generations. Nervous? Mira asked quietly, standing beside me as cameras positioned for the live broadcast that would be viewed in legal centers worldwide. Centered, I corrected. This moment isn't about personal validation or family narrative. It's about introducing systems that can make legal expertise more accessible and transparent for millions of people. That purpose transcends any individual recognition. She nodded, understanding as always that my motivation had never been proving critics wrong, but creating something that mattered beyond conventional metrics of success. As the final countdown began, I surveyed the trading floor below, the physical manifestation of financial systems that had operated with remarkable consistency for decades, systems that Nexus would now help transform. Not through destruction, but through evolution. Not erasing what came before, but building something more inclusive upon its foundation. 10 seconds, the floor director announced. In that moment of anticipation, a curious calm settled over me. Not the satisfaction of vindication, but the fulfillment of alignment. The artificial separation between worlds was dissolving. Integration was replacing compartmentalization, authenticity replacing strategic performance. 3, 2, 1. I pressed the button. The familiar bell resonated throughout the exchange as trading officially opened. Cameras captured the moment for legal and financial networks worldwide, introducing Olivia Walsh not as the disappointing daughter of a legal dynasty, but as the architect of its evolving future. The immediate interviews passed in a blur of focused engagement. Legal reporters asked substantive questions about Nexus's technology, implementation timelines, and marketplace implications. I addressed each query with the clarity that came from years of development and testing, emphasizing the practical impact rather than personal achievement. Nexus didn't emerge from opposition to traditional legal systems, I explained to a CNBC reporter who framed the platform as rebellion against my family's industry. It developed from recognizing their limitations and envisioning more inclusive possibilities. Revolution through evolution, not destruction. Did your background in traditional legal circles through the Walsh family influence Nexus's development? A Bloomberg analyst asked. Absolutely, I acknowledged. Understanding established systems was essential to reimagining them effectively. The goal was never rejecting what existed, but expanding what was possible, creating infrastructure that preserves necessary stability while eliminating unnecessary gatekeeping. As the morning progressed, the market continued processing Nexus's implications, not just for law firms, but for the entire ecosystem of global corporate governance. Traditional legal stocks steadied after initial pressure as analysts recognized that adaptation rather than extinction was the likely outcome. Technology indices continued climbing as investors recognized broader implications beyond immediate disruption. By midday, Walsh & Partners had stabilized, down only 8%, significantly outperforming competitors who lacked my father's strategic adaptability. Their official statement had evolved into a more comprehensive response acknowledging Nexus's innovation while highlighting Walsh & Partners' capacity to integrate new technologies into established client relationships. The legal landscape is evolving rapidly, my father was quoted in their press release. Walsh & Partners has maintained market leadership through generations by recognizing transformation early and adapting purposefully. We view Nexus's technology as an opportunity to enhance our client services rather than a challenge to our fundamental value proposition. The statement revealed his exceptional strategic agility, reframing potential disruption as opportunity, positioning Walsh & Partners not as defender of outdated systems, but as evolved interpreter between established relationships and new technologies. This adaptability had always been his greatest strength, the quality that had maintained the Walsh influence through decades of legal evolution. As I returned to Nexus headquarters after the exchange ceremonies, the office hummed with the focused Energy of a team witnessing their years of work finally receiving deserved recognition. Developers who had coded through countless revision cycles. Legal strategists who had mapped implementation pathways across regulatory frameworks. Operations specialists who had built infrastructure for scale while maintaining security. These were the people who had made Nexus possible. "The team has something for you," Mira announced as I entered the main workspace where everyone had gathered. Alejandro stepped forward, holding a simply framed document, the original whiteboard sketch of Nexus's core architecture from 3 years earlier, preserved digitally before being erased for the next development iteration. "We thought today was the right moment to remind you where this started," he explained as he presented the frame. "One person with a vision that existing legal systems could be better, fairer, more accessible. Before the funding rounds, before the acquisitions, before today's valuation and public recognition, just an idea that legal expertise should serve more than those who already had access." The gesture touched me deeply. Recognition not of what Nexus had become in terms of market valuation or industry influence, but of the foundational purpose that had driven its development from the beginning, the vision that had sustained us through pivots and challenges, through skepticism and limited resources, through the consistent underestimation that had paradoxically created space for innovation. "Thank you," I said, accepting the frame and addressing the gathered team. "But this wasn't one person's vision. It was brought to life through your brilliant implementation, your persistent refinement, your commitment to purpose beyond profit. Today's recognition belongs to all of us equally." As the team dispersed to manage the ongoing response to the announcement, Layla approached with her tablet displaying real-time media coverage. "The narrative is evolving interestingly," she observed. "It started as legal rebel disrupts family industry, but it's shifting to something more substantive. Recognition that Nexus represents necessary evolution rather than mere disruption for disruption's sake." "That's the story that matters," I agreed. "Not personal vindication or family drama, but meaningful transformation of systems that need evolution." "Speaking of family drama," she continued with carefully neutral professionalism, "your mother has called the office 11 times in the past hour. Your executive assistant has been politely explaining that you're unavailable until this afternoon." I smiled at this predictable response. Eleanor Walsh would be frantically recalibrating her narrative, determining how to position her daughter's unexpected success within her carefully constructed social framework. "I'll speak with her this evening," I decided, "after markets close and the initial media cycle completes." "Also," Layla added with unusual hesitation, "your brother arrived about 15 minutes ago. He's waiting in the visitor conference room, said he wanted to see Nexus in person rather than reading about it in legal briefs." This unexpected development suggested Nathan was processing the revelation with more personal consideration than professional analysis, less concerned with market implications, and more focused on what this meant for his understanding of his sister and potentially his own path. I found him standing at the conference room windows, looking out over the Brooklyn skyline with thoughtful contemplation. He turned as I entered, his expression suggesting he was seeing me with new clarity. "This is slightly more impressive than consulting work," he observed, gesturing toward the expansive office space visible through the glass walls, developers working on advanced algorithms, legal specialists mapping implementation strategies, the physical manifestation of what I had built while my family believed I was floundering. "Just slightly," I agreed with a smile. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, no accusation in his voice, just genuine curiosity. "I understand keeping it from mother and even father, but we've always been allies, Olivia." I considered his question carefully. "It wasn't about trust, Nathan. It was about building something that stood entirely on its own merit without any connection to the Walsh name, even the supportive aspects of it." "And perhaps," I admitted, about finding out who I was as a creator separate from who I was as a Walsh. He nodded slowly, processing this explanation. I watched the opening. Bell ceremony. You looked complete. Like you'd finally connected all the parts of yourself that our family structure had fragmented. His perception was surprisingly insightful. That's exactly how it felt. Integration rather than compartmentalization. The legal networks are calling you a visionary, he continued. The person who recognized that legal expertise could be democratized through technology, while the established firms were still debating whether to upgrade their document management systems. He laughed lightly. Father included, though he's adapting faster than most. That's his greatest strength, I acknowledged. He defends tradition but isn't blinded by it. Nathan moved from the window to the conference table, studying the Nexus platform demonstration displayed on the embedded screen. When you mentioned positions for people who understand both traditional systems and the need for transformation, were you serious? The question confirmed my earlier impression, that my revelation was prompting him to reconsider his own path. Completely serious, I confirmed. Nexus needs people who can translate between established legal practice and emerging models, who understand both the value and limitations of traditional approaches. He looked up from the screen, his expression more vulnerable than I had seen since we were children. I've been following the expected Walsh path, but I've never felt ownership of it the way you've clearly claimed your direction. It was always easier to meet expectations than to question whether they aligned with my own vision. And now? I prompted gently. Now I'm wondering if there's a way to honor what's valuable in the Walsh legacy while still participating in its evolution. He gestured toward the Nexus operations visible beyond the conference room. What you've built here represents that possibility. Transformation that doesn't require complete rejection of what came before. His articulation captured precisely what I had aimed to create. Not destruction of established legal systems, but their necessary evolution, preserving what worked while transforming what didn't. There's always a place for you here, Nathan, I said. Not because you're my brother or a Walsh, but because you understand both worlds we're trying to bridge. For the first time since the morning's announcement, I saw my achievement through fresh eyes, not just as personal success or industry disruption, but as potential liberation for others wrestling with similar tensions between tradition and innovation, between inherited expectations and authentic purpose. The revolution I had started wasn't just technological, but philosophical, challenging not just how legal systems operated, but how we defined success, legacy, and meaningful contribution within them. By mid-afternoon, the initial shockwaves of the Nexus announcement had evolved into structured responses across the legal landscape. The most forward-thinking firms were already establishing Nexus integration teams, while traditionalists convened emergency partner meetings to discuss defensive strategies. Legal technology stocks soared as investors recognized that Nexus represented not an isolated innovation, but the leading edge of an inevitable transformation. I had scheduled a brief media conference for 3 p.m. to address the growing list of questions from legal and financial outlets, a single focused opportunity for the press rather than the scattered interviews that would fragment our messaging. As I prepared in my office, reviewing the key points our communications team had developed, my assistant appeared at the door. "Your father is here," she announced, clearly uncertain whether this represented a welcome visit or potential complication on such a pivotal day. "Please show him in," I replied, surprised by his unannounced appearance but appreciative of the proactive approach. It validated my lifelong impression that beneath the traditional exterior, Jonathan Walsh Sr. possessed an adaptability that had sustained his success across decades of legal evolution. He entered my office with characteristic poise, his gaze taking in the minimalist design, the technological innovations seamlessly integrated into the workspace, the wall of windows overlooking the Brooklyn and Manhattan skylines, physically positioned between worlds, just as Nexus existed between legal paradigms. Impressive, he said simply, accepting my gesture toward the visitor's chair. Both the platform and the strategic rollout. The timing of the Singapore acquisition created maximum impact. Thank you, I replied, recognizing this as high praise. From someone whose legal strategies had shaped corporate governance for decades. Walsh & Partners Executive Committee met this morning. He continued without preamble. They've authorized me to discuss potential collaboration opportunities between our firm and Nexus. I couldn't help but smile at his directness. Most firms are still figuring out whether to fight or embrace what we've built, and you're already thinking about collaborative structures. Fighting innovation merely postpones the inevitable while increasing its cost, he replied with the precision that had made him a formidable negotiator. The question isn't whether legal practice will transform, but how traditional expertise adapts within that transformation. His framing perfectly captured the philosophy that had guided Nexus's development, not elimination of established legal knowledge, but its democratization through more accessible channels. Not devaluing expertise, but expanding its reach beyond traditional limitations. What form of collaboration are you envisioning? I asked, professionally curious about his strategic thinking. An integration partnership initially, he explained. Walsh & Partners providing specialized expertise for complex scenarios that still require human judgment, while Nexus handles routine documentation and standard formations. Eventually, a more comprehensive knowledge-sharing arrangement where our precedent library helps strengthen your algorithmic frameworks. His proposal demonstrated remarkable clarity about Nexus's operational model, impressively well-informed for someone who had learned of its existence only hours earlier. But then, comprehensive preparation had always been his trademark. You've reviewed our technical documentation thoroughly, I observed. The moment your name appeared on that filing, I instructed our technology council to perform a complete analysis, he acknowledged with a slight smile. Why waste time with surprise or denial when adaptation offers clearer advantages? This pragmatic approach revealed why he had maintained his position at the industry's forefront, while many contemporaries had been gradually marginalized by changing practices. He defended tradition where warranted but wasn't imprisoned by it, a quality I had inherited despite our different applications of it. The partnership concept has merit, I acknowledged. We've always envisioned Nexus as complementary to specialized legal expertise, not a complete replacement. The most effective implementation involves both technological efficiency and human judgment at appropriate intervention points. Precisely, he agreed. Routine matters benefit from algorithmic processing, while complex governance still requires contextual understanding and strategic foresight. The alignment in our thinking was striking, despite the very different paths we had taken. Perhaps the analytical framework that made the Walshes successful across generations operated independently of whether it was applied to traditional practice or innovative disruption. There's another dimension to consider, my father added, his tone shifting slightly. Personal as well as professional. I raised an eyebrow, inviting elaboration. This morning's announcement represents more than technological innovation. It symbolizes evolution within the Walsh legacy itself, adaptation rather than mere continuation. He paused, choosing his words with characteristic care. That evolution affects family dynamics as well as professional standing. Mother, I surmised, understanding his implicit concern. Eleanor's identity has been constructed around specific definitions of success and influence, he confirmed. Definitions that Nexus challenges fundamentally. Her adjustment will require time. I appreciated his diplomatic phrasing of what would likely be a difficult reconceptualization for my mother. Her entire social framework was built on traditional markers of achievement and established hierarchies of influence, precisely the structures Nexus was designed to transform. I'll speak with her this evening, I assured him, though I don't expect immediate acceptance. Acceptance may not be the appropriate objective, he suggested thoughtfully. Understanding might be more realistic in the near term. Eleanor doesn't need to embrace your vision to recognize its significance. His insight reminded me why, despite our professional divergence, I had maintained greater connection with my father than my mother. He prioritized comprehension over agreement, while she demanded conformity to established patterns. There's something else, he continued, reaching into his jacket pocket and withdrawing a small leather portfolio. I brought this for you. It seemed appropriate today. Inside was a handwritten letter on Walsh & Partners stationery. My father's. Distinctive, precise script covering both sides of the heavy bond paper. I looked at him questioningly. When you declined the judicial clerkship and chose a different path, I wrote this but never sent it, he explained. Pride prevented me then, but perhaps perspective allows it now. I unfolded the letter, dated 3 years earlier, precisely when I had walked away from the traditional legal career he had envisioned for me. Olivia, your decision contradicts every path I imagined for you, which perhaps reveals more about the limitations of my imagination than the wisdom of your choice. The law, as I have practiced it, represents a system perfected over centuries, but systems require periodic revolution to remain vital. I find myself remembering your childhood questions that no one else thought to ask. Why certain precedents remained unchallenged? Why access required specific credentials? Why efficiency yielded to tradition when both might coexist? Questions that revealed not rebellion, but vision, seeing beyond what exists to what might be possible. While I cannot guide you on the path you've chosen, I recognize the courage it requires. The Walsh determination has always served our family's advancement. Perhaps your application of it will expand our understanding of what advancement truly means. With respect for your conviction, Father. I looked up from the letter, genuinely moved by this evidence that even as he outwardly supported my mother's narrative of disappointment, he had privately recognized the validity of my different direction. You understood even then, I said quietly. I understood your conviction, if not its specific application, he corrected. The details of what you were building remained unclear until this morning, but the purpose behind it was evident in every conversation we've had since you were old enough to question existing frameworks. His acknowledgement that he had seen my divergence not as failure, but as alternative expression of the same determination that had built the Walsh legacy, represented a form of validation I hadn't realized still mattered to me. Not because I needed his approval for what I'd built, but because it confirmed the continuity between us despite our different paths. The Walsh & Partners partnership offer is sincere and strategically sound, he continued, returning to his professional demeanor. But it exists independently of any personal considerations. Evaluate it on its merits, not its origin. I will, I assured him, appreciating this clear separation between family connection and business proposition. As he stood to leave, he gestured toward the monitor displaying real-time data about Nexus's global implementation. You've created something remarkable, Olivia, not because it challenges existing structures, but because it expands their fundamental purpose, making legal expertise accessible beyond traditional boundaries. His articulation captured precisely what had driven Nexus's development, not rejection of established legal principles, but extension of their reach to those historically excluded by financial, social, or geographic constraints. That was always the objective, I confirmed, not disruption for its own sake, but inclusion by design. After he departed, I remained at my desk, processing this unexpected interaction. The father who had publicly maintained neutral detachment from my career choices had privately recognized their validity years before today's vindication. The traditional legal practitioner whose methods I had seemingly rejected was proposing integration between our approaches. The Walsh legacy I had distanced myself from was potentially expanding to incorporate rather than exclude my divergent path. My reflections were interrupted by Mira, arriving to confirm final arrangements for the press conference. "Was that your father I saw leaving?" she asked, not bothering to hide her surprise. "Yes. He came to propose a strategic partnership between Walsh and Partners and Nexus." I handed her the outline he had provided, watching as she scanned it with professional assessment. "It's actually quite innovative," she acknowledged with reluctant admiration. "Leveraging their specialized expertise while implementing our automation framework. Not what I expected from traditional counsel." "My father has always been more adaptable than he appears," I replied. "It's why Walsh and Partners has remained relevant through decades of legal evolution." "And the personal dimension?" she asked carefully. "This morning, he discovered his supposedly underachieving daughter has built technology that transforms his entire profession. That's a significant recalibration." "He's handling it with characteristic pragmatism," I said, focusing on strategic response rather than emotional reaction. "And your mother?" "That conversation still awaits," I acknowledged. "But first, we have a press conference to manage. The personal implications can be addressed after the professional ones are properly established." As we headed toward the conference room where journalists were gathering, I felt a deepening integration of the worlds I had previously kept separate. My father's unexpected appearance represented not just professional acknowledgement, but personal recognition, seeing me not as a disappointing deviation from the Walsh legacy, but as its evolution into new forms. The press conference would focus on Nexus's technological implications and market positioning, but underlying this professional narrative ran a more personal one: how transformation often requires temporary separation from established structures, not to reject their value, but to expand their application beyond traditional limitations. The lesson extended beyond my specific experience to a broader principle: that meaningful innovation frequently emerges not from total rejection of existing systems, but from the courage to reimagine their fundamental purpose while temporarily stepping outside their constraints. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.